Hi, and welcome to another edition of Talking About Teaching Economics. Today, my guest is Patrick deLamirande from Cape Breton University. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to teach that wonderful topic of monopoly in an introductory micro class. So Patrick, let's make this a little bit more fun, a little lighter than some of the other ones. What made you become an economist? Let's start there.
Oh my God, interesting story. I'm from Quebec. In Quebec, we have the Cégep. So at the Cégep, I was in science, studying chemistry, physics. And honestly, at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I wanted to go to university for sure, but exactly doing what, I'm not sure. But I was not that bad at school, not great marks, but yeah, good, but not fantastic. So I went to see one of my professor of physics, and so I told him, I'm thinking about going in physics. I'm very interested in that. And he looked at me, just, no, go in engineering. You know, and I'm pretty sure what he had in mind is, no, you're good, but you're not that good to have a good career in physics. It just, okay. So I went in engineering, but after a year, what we find out is, and that's a story for many, many people, just being interested in something, but interested enough to pursue a career in that field is two different things. After a while, I say, okay, that's not my place. I don't know what to do. So I called my best friend, David, and I told him, just, oh, I'm quit. I don't want to pursue becoming an engineer anymore. So I don't know what to do. And he looked at me and say, Patrick, it's obvious. Just, what do you mean it's obvious? Yes, it's obvious. Just, okay, can you help me on this? Go in economics. Just, why? You talk about politics all the time and you're good in math. So 1 + 1 = 2. So go in economics. And the rest is history. So I registered economics without knowing exactly what it was, just a bit. And yes, the rest is history. Got a master's degree, my PhD, and now I'm teaching economics. So, and I'm an economist. So when people, ask to find a way to define me, I'm an economist.
And that opens the door to so many other comments. So in general, when you're teaching an introductory microeconomics class, what's one of the big lessons you're trying to, course-wide, what's one of the big recurring things or big lessons you try to get across to your students?
My view about teaching changed a lot since I started to teach economics 20 years ago. Now I want, if my students ask to remember something, is if we're still talking about a subject today is because this question is not easy to answer. So I try to give them the two sides of the question when we talk about a topic, just because, yes, the easy questions are already solved. The questions that we remain to study are difficult questions. Not difficult in terms of how to analyze those questions, but mainly because there is no clear, definite answer to those questions. So so this is what I try to do with my students in all my classes now. So
you're trying to leave them with the sense that the big policy questions particularly are all just trade-offs.
Exactly. It's a question of trade-off. There's some cost and benefit on each side. And at the end, it's how you weight those costs and benefit. And when I finished a discussion, I told them, just your call on that is as good as mine. Because it's a question, as an economist, we're not there to provide answers. We're there to help decision makers. Now, if you have a seat like you're become a minister, then it's completely different. You're not a decision maker. But our role as an economist is to advise decision makers and just to provide them, this is what we expect to happen. Should we do that? That's another question.
That's up to you. So I do want to get into the idea of monopoly and that chapter that's in every intro course. When in the course do you do that monopoly chapter?
But since economists are quite in love with perfect competition, and so this is the basic framework I compare all other markets to. So
Mhm.
I start talking about cost for sure,
Right.
and then I talk about the revenue, and the revenues for firms depends on which market you're competing. And so I start with perfect competition all the time,
Okay.
saying that this is the basic framework, this is what economists look like, and then it start to open doors because this is the framework, and then we can start from this one to say, okay, but what if this assumption is not satisfied? Uh,
Mhm.
if we don't talk about homogeneous product, if we decrease the number of firms, what else if the consumers don't have perfect information? This is all
Mm.
stuff that it's very interesting to talk about, but we need to start from a starting point. So
Mhm.
basically, I start with the perfect competition, and then it depends. Sometimes I can go with directly to the monopoly, to the other extreme
Mhm.
situation, or I can go gradually and building up to this. So going through the monopolistic competition, then oligopoly, and then.
Right.
But I tend to wait for the oligopoly for the last chapter
Yeah.
because for me it's the most complicated one.
Well, it's the one that doesn't really, that oligopoly chapter is the one that really doesn't fit the analysis framework. You're using a new set of tools.
Exactly. So we introduced the concept of game theory, and now
Mhm.
it's opening a completely new door. It's going to another topics per se.
Yeah.
And since it's one of my expertise, game theory, so I become sometimes too much enthusiastic about it. So I
I
have to
understand.
refrain myself. Oh, okay, well, we cannot talk about this.
Yeah, settle down, Sparky.
Oh,
Yeah, I get that a lot. So yeah, you do it more towards the end of the semester,
yes,
and you do it after. So it's sort of the end. It's the second last or the last thing you do
pretty much.
typically. Yeah, okay. No, that's not uncommon. It's just there's a growing debate in some places, and I've talked to some people that do it first before perfect competition,
Okay.
which is an
Hmm.
interesting idea.
But But the problem I see with this approach is since we talk about supply and demand right at the beginning,
Mm,
and then we talk about this topic later on in the course, but the basic of supply and demand, the way we teach it, is we suppose perfect competition.
that's right.
So that's why I prefer to continue in this way. So continue assuming perfect competition and then go
Hmm.
a bit deeper. So what do we have in mind when we talk about perfect competition? What are
Yeah.
the assumptions that are beyond, not beyond, is, I'm sorry, my first language is French. It's
Under.
that is implied directly when we suppose perfect competition
Mm,
and start to have a discussion. Okay, are those assumptions realistic?
yeah.
And honestly, I'm pretty much sure you have the same thing. So when we have a question like, can you give me examples of perfect competitive market? It's very hard to find good example because every
It
time say
is.
this, but yeah, not exactly, but close enough. This market, but no.
Mm,
And it's always a bit tricky to find perfect example.
yeah, I mean, being out in the prairies, I do have a little advantage because grain markets tend to be highly
Yes,
competitive.
yes.
Um, so when you get at this towards the end of the semester, um, what's your core message when you're covering this material? I mean, what's the big learning outcome you're looking for?
But you have to keep in mind that when I teach it, I'm teaching economics in a business school.
Right.
So this is why I think it's important because since I'm teaching it to business people, businessmen, the one thing that they want to achieve is to have a monopoly,
Oh, of
to
course.
have a lot of market power. So this is something that I want to keep in mind when I teach it, because the
Mm,
basic signal, the basic message that we try to send when we teach it as an economist to economists is monopoly is not good. It's not good for the society for different reasons that we can discuss eventually if you want. But the businessmen, this is what they want. They want to have more market power, not
of
less.
course.
So I try to keep this in mind when I teach it. So knowing your audience, it's
Mm.
very important. Just because, yes, I'm not teaching to economists, I'm teaching to people in business.
Right. So that, yeah. So what is the big message then? Given the audience is business people, and so you don't want to be running down monopoly too hard because that's
No,
their
but
dream. But at the same
no,
time,
but
what are you trying to get across? What does a if I let me ask a question a different way. What would you walk out of a class if students that demonstrated a piece of knowledge about this material and you went, yes, that's a win? What would that piece of knowledge be?
the piece of knowledge is to understand how the behavior of the monopoly could be good or bad for the society and in which sense. Okay, because in some situations we have natural monopoly, it's normal to have monopoly, and we have to deal with this. But it's very to understand that those firms having a monopoly power, they react to incentives as well.
Mhm.
So if we try to regulate them or we want to analyze their behavior, we have to understand that they respond to incentives.
Mhm.
And if they can get it, for me, this will be the win. Saying,
Okay.
okay, there's a firms, if you change the way the market works, we change the regulation, they
Right.
will react. In which
Okay.
way? Then that's another question. But this
Yeah.
is something that I want them to
Okay.
challenge, to
Well,
know, to
that's
be
really interesting.
critical and to think, yes.
So when you're teaching this material, where do you find students typically get caught up or get themselves into trouble? What's one of the things that you're trying to get across that students seem to wrestle with?
Definitely not the math, because reaching at this point, we covered the perfect competition. We covered
Mm.
some different aspects of the market. So they got it. Or if they're not, they're in big trouble. That's another question.
Yeah, that's another topic.
Yes, but in general, reaching that point, they understand the math. And monopoly versus perfect competition, it's easier to understand from, for what I get from the students. So at the end, it's really to, and this is where it's difficult, I think, to teach because one is we go through basic mathematical problem or basic
Right.
problem. It's not very challenging because we want to evaluate if they know how the monopoly will behave. For me, it's sometimes the discussion a bit further away, saying that, okay, how do we define, how can we say that the firm has a monopoly power?
When is a monopoly a monopolist?
Exactly.
Or when is
So,
a single firm a monopolist is a better idea.
yes.
Yeah.
An example of this, that's the discussion is interesting. Is okay, I live in Sydney, Nova Scotia, tiny town. The closest city, big city is Halifax, which is 4 hours away from here. And then we have an airport. Air Canada for many years was the only one carrier coming here, winter and summer both. Did Air Canada have a monopoly power? And the first answer that we can say is yes, obviously, it's the only one. But what are the alternatives?
Mhm.
And then we can go by car, we can go by taxi, there were a bus service, there's a shuttle service. Are they good alternative to the air flight? And this is, my point of view, this is the interesting conversation.
Mhm.
Because we cannot analyze the behavior of a firm on a monopoly if we don't understand the world around that. So,
Right.
but this kind of discussion are difficult because even for us, when it's time to analyze that, there's no clear way, perfect way to define the
No.
market. So it's challenging. But I find that the students, it's very interesting when you look at their eyes and say, oh, okay, I see how it's complicated. And then I
Yeah.
say, yes, we have something of it.
Well, and then so that brings up my next question because I like concrete examples when I'm teaching. And like with perfect competition, it's really hard in the Canadian context to come up with an example of a true pure monopolist. What do you use for examples? I mean, the Air Canada thing is a great launching point.
Yeah.
But that's not, I don't think that's representative of most places.
No, fortunately in Canada, the best example I think in any province is the power corporation.
Yeah, electric.
There's the electric
Yeah.
companies. There's no alternative. If you don't want to rely electricity, yes, you can produce your own electricity, but come on, okay? Yet, and eventually we'll have solar panel. All of us will have our solar. We're not there yet. So right now there's a
Mm,
monopoly. It's a regulated monopoly pretty much everywhere. Is
yeah.
it owned by the crown or not? That's another question.
Hmm.
But at the end, it's a monopoly. So I think this is the basic one that we have, and
Yeah.
this is the best example. And everyone knows, everybody, every student knows about Nova Scotia Power. So
Right.
in Nova Scotia, but
Yeah. SAS
other
Power
provinces
here
the
or
same.
wherever. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the only one, there's that. I will often make jokes about Nova Scotia and liquor. Um,
Yes, but that's another one. But again,
yeah.
there's still some
Less so.
competition.
Less
It-
so than it used to be.
Yes, but there's some alternative.
Hmm.
There's some beer places that they're saying, well,
Yeah.
so is it is it a real monopoly? Yes, but yeah. But
Not, no, again, not
I'm
as
making
much
fun
as
of
it
Nova
once was.
Scotia and SLC all the time anyway,
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah,
yes.
I do as well. Yes. Not just Nova Scotia. Um, so what tips and tricks what tips and tricks do you use when trying to get sort of the mechanics down and the bigger ideas across to your students? Like, do you have any weird gimmicks that you do that would be different from what's in most textbooks or things like that?
Uh, I don't think I have different tricks when we reach this point, except using real life example as much
Mhm.
as I can. Okay. Uh, so yes, talking about Nova Scotia Power, uh, I'm making fun of Nova Scotia Power in the sense that they're spending money on marketing. And for me,
Hi.
this why? Because if you're a monopoly, everybody, I will not consume more electricity because Nova Scotia is doing a marketing campaign, right? So, but since Nova Scotia Power is owned by a private firm, Emera,
Oh,
then
is it now?
yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So what I am explaining to the students is they're doing marketing campaign as Nova Scotia Power just to make sure that we don't complain too much about them, so they will keep the monopoly. So it's
Right.
a real rent-seeking activity, which
That's a
is not good.
great example. I am going to be using that one going forward.
Because yes, that's true. So what's the point? I will not consume more electricity because they're doing a good marketing campaign. This
Yeah,
no. So
that's
why?
that's great. um, so I mean, this idea of defining markets and real world examples, I think maybe gives us a great launching point into your previous life.
Yes.
So you spent some time at the Competition Bureau. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your role there was, what they're about?
Okay. Yes. Right after my PhD, I worked for 18 months at the Competition Bureau, which is located in Ottawa, well, the French part, but still. Uh, and honestly, it was a fantastic experience. Uh, Fantastic in the sense that I had to think about problems that we don't
Mm,
get in books.
right.
We talk about real life problem. How do we define a market? We talk about perfect competition. We talk about the monopoly, but to define if there's a monopoly or this is a monopolistic competition market, is it a perfect competition market? We have to define what the market is first.
Hmm.
And how do we do that? We don't learn that. Yeah, again, I had to wait until my PhD to ask a professor asking me that question. How do we define a market? And honestly, I didn't know. And
Hmm.
just yeah, but I was able to use the market and define supply and demand. But how do you collect the data? How do we evaluate this? We had so in that sense, it was a very great experience because I have to
Mm,
think about real life problems. real economics in the real life. So that was very interesting. So I have been hired as an economist because the way the Competition Bureau worked at that time and is still working in the same way right now is they have their own internal experts that there are people with economists, people mainly with a PhD, but still, and there are internal experts that help developing cases. Okay, because the role of the Competition Bureau is to investigate cases when we suspect firms to act in a bad way according to the antitrust law of Canada. So we can see it as a police or investigation body just for the antitrust, by the anti-competitive law in Canada. So there's a team that is responsible to collect the evidence, to start the analysis. They have lawyers, but we have also economists, but they have also economists working and helping to build those cases. So during a year, the economists over there have been asked to work on different cases. So I had to work on real estate cases, regulated professions. We have when I was there, we had a case about the NHL.
Oh, cool. What was that one about?
Well, it was the case in Hamilton.
I'm ignorant. I don't recall this.
No, because it's funny because it's in your book.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, sorry.
The city, yes, because the basic idea is we had a question about, is it anti-competitive from the NHL, from the hockey market,
right?
That the NHL prevent another team to settle in the region of Toronto. And we had discussions about economists. And the first question was, what is the market? And again, between me, I remember a discussion during lunchtime with one of my colleagues, and we didn't agree on the definition of the market. My definition of the market was, you cannot have a team alone. So the market is the league.
Oh.
So then it's predicting the profit of the league. And the league is in competition with other leagues, other shows, other entertaining in the industry. So depending on how you define the market, then you can say that it's anti-competitive or no, or not. So if you use the definition of this is the NHL product, this is their product and not the team, then the company can do whatever they want. They can manage. It's an internal decision, is not anti-competitive per se.
That's an interesting argument because my initial instinct would be to look at the team as the unit and the ones selling the tickets, because they're the ones actually selling the tickets.
Yes, but I forgot to mention because the NHL has a rule that they prevent a team to set within a 200 kilometers radius.
Right.
So it was impossible to set another team, let's say in Hamilton, without the permission of Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah. Well, and the old joke from Hamilton was if Hamilton gets a team, then Toronto will want one too.
Yeah.
But I mean, that case was really interesting because it looked like it was, had a high likelihood of happening for a while. And that market can definitely looks like it could support a second team.
But that was not the question.
Yeah.
Because
that's not the question, and that's important to understand.
It's the same thing with McDonald's. When McDonald's can decide where they want to put a new franchise, but it's their decision to protect each of them from another McDonald's that will be too close. There's nothing we can say about that. That's an internal decision. And McDonald's is in competition with other fast food restaurants.
Yeah.
So that will be another question. So
it's a really neat discussion. Yeah, no, that's a great discussion.
So anyway, so this is what I found very interesting during my period at the Competition Bureau, because we had such interesting conversations about how does it work?
What's the right way to think about this problem?
Yes.
And getting that across to students and having that firsthand experience trying to figure this out, I think can add a lot of value.
Oh, yes. And especially when you talk about hockey, Canadian students are very interested by
Yeah,
those.
everybody's ears perk up. Yeah, for sure. So one of the questions I really like to ask, what do you do for assessment? I mean, we've talked about some of the things that you're trying to get across both in your course generally and with respect to monopoly and this issue of how do you define a market? A non-trivial question. How do you go about assessing whether or not you've hit those marks?
What do you mean by?
Well, so you've got to assess students. Right?
Yes,
How
okay.
do you know? How do you know? So, how do you test your students? How do you assess your students? How do you assign grades? Is one part of the question. But the other part of the question is, how do you know beyond just the student mark whether or not you've been effective in getting those core messages that we've been talking about across?
I see there's two answers I will give you to
Sure.
your questions. The first one is the way I see it.
Good economic response.
The first one is the requirements to pass the course. Okay. Then, to be honest, we had a lot of students, so the marking could be difficult. So the way I evaluate the students right now involve quizzes, tests that they are monitored on Moodle right now.
Okay.
So they are administrated through Moodle. So it's more multiple choice questions for many of them. But I keep exams where they have to write down equations, compute model, calculate find the equilibrium for a market structure, and analyze the situation of a monopoly, finding the optimal profit for the monopoly, the optimal quantity produced. So I want to keep this in this way. So in one sense, I have to keep in mind that I'm not training economists. This will be future people working in business, doing marketing. So for me, just what I want to focus is just to know, okay, do you get at least the idea of the concept? So there is and for me, especially for first year courses, it's a new language that they are learning. So there's a lot of basic concept that they have to know before being able to go to more advanced concepts. So I focus very much on the understanding on the basic concept. What is a monopoly? What are the conditions? What are the conditions to get a monopoly? And then I always have few questions that try to go a little bit further, deeper the understanding on this. And in that case, then I'll try to apply to a more realistic problem. So a firm in that situation, which kind of behavior do you expect, and what would be the kind of outcome that could happen? Question about the regulation, it's also a part of this section at the end. But the assessment, especially with the reality I have now in my university, where we have a lot of students, so I had to adapt the way I evaluated students in that way.
Yeah.
But basically, the philosophy is the same, as there is a minimum of stuff that students should know, no matter what. And then having 2 or 3 questions on top of it, just to see if they are able to make links with the their real life.
I call those the 90 percenters, right? You can get up to, if you get everything else correct, you can get 90%. This is going to tell me where you fit in that range. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, and that's hard. And you know, it's one of the things in talking to a lot of different instructors across the country, constraints are real. Go figure.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And this is maybe something that we don't, again, this is something that I want to improve the way I teach, is to use the technology more efficiently. Sometimes I have the feeling that the difference between me and a university professor from 100 years ago is now I'm using PowerPoint instead of a chalk.
Yeah.
Because I don't take the new benefit that the technology can give us. And this is something that I will try definitely to work better in that sense.
It's hard. I mean, integrating technology into a live classroom is a challenge
Yes,
because you want to met. Problem is, and I've played with this, the technology becomes a distraction.
it could be. And
Yeah.
this is where we have to be careful with this. As an example, yes, we're doing this podcast. For sure, I will very likely use this in my class for sure. It's just because I'm not a big fan of reinventing the wheel. So if
Hmm.
something is well done, so I will just use it directly.
Well, if it's
So
not broke, don't fix it.
exactly. So this is what I told the students very often. I'm using some videos I found on YouTube. They're very well done. I make sure they cover the topic, the right way, correctly. But it's done. I don't have to do it again. So there's a fixed cost of producing those videos.
Yeah.
So why not benefit from it? So
And the number of resources students have access to is really changed, and you're right, it's changed my approach to the classroom a fair bit, and I'm still trying to figure out how to use this material effectively.
yes. And the other thing is they will use it anyway.
Oh yeah, I
So
had
it's better for us, I think, just to identify, hey, if you're going to use YouTube videos,
here's a good one.
use this one, and this one.
Yeah,
Okay.
these ones are
Those are
better
the
than some of the
exactly.
other ones. Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
better in this way.
So I'll give you the last word.
Okay.
And yeah, what advice would you have for a brand new instructor who's going to sit down and think about designing a lecture or series of lectures on Monopoly?
And it is just for the monopoly. I
Yeah,
will go
yeah.
back to the monopoly per se, but just at the at the basic, it's always the same. What is the message you want your students to remember
Yeah.
or to get at the end? And at the end of each lecture, I recap. Okay, if you have one thing to get from this chapter, this is the message.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the technical stuff. It's really the question of how it's linked with the reality. About the monopoly, it's how, and specifically for the monopoly, is the regulated part that for me it's complicated. Because yes, we want to regulate monopoly sometime to improve the efficiency on the market, but we need to understand that the monopoly will react to this. And if
Mm-hmm.
students don't understand this, or the people don't understand, the policymakers don't understand that,
Yeah,
then the remedy could be worse than the problem you want to solve.
that's right.
And this is maybe the advice. The advice I will give it to the instructor. Try to link it to the real life, real example, and talk about always. Economists talk about incentives all the time. So yes, I will go with this point.
Great. Thank you very much. My guest today has been Patrick deLamirande of Cape Breton University.
Thank you very much.